Hello everyone, this is Dylan from Swedish Stew, and today we're going to cover some fundamental intro level tea knowledge, specifically what is green tea, because I do see a little bit of confusion online, and how do we brew it, or how do I brew it. So, right off the bat, if you notice, I do not have a gaiwan. I do not use gaiwans for green teas or yellow teas. If you can, if you want to, fine, but I don't. I use two gong dao beis. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm cooling off the water. My goal is a water temperature that is uncomfortable to the touch, but I can still hold it. I think that's a good temperature, especially because I know that's going to sit a little bit. So, today the tea we're going to drink is Dingu Dafang. We'll talk a little bit about Dingu Dafang. Dingu Dafang is a tea from Huangshan, specifically Sichuan. And if we take a look, we can see that this tea resembles Longjing. Now, a lot of people jump to the conclusion that this tea copied the appearance of Longjing because of the popularity. And honestly, that's a pretty good guess. That makes complete sense. It happens a lot in the tea industry. You have a famous tea, a popular tea, and other teas emulate it. But in fact, it's the other way around. While Longjing does have a longer history than Dingu Dafang was actually the first pan-fried tea, or the first tea to have this flattened shape. It got very popular, and then makers from Hangzhou learned this style and took it back, and Longjing adapted to that. So as you saw a minute ago, I was passing the water back and forth. I was cooling the water, but I was also heating up the vessel so we can take a smell. Now, Dingu Dafang is very, very similar to Longjing. And I think at this point, they've kind of influenced each other, where originally Dingu Dafang influenced Longjing, but then Longjing got very popular, and Longjing has now influenced Dingu Dafang, where, especially if they're using the Longjing 43 cultivar, there's a lot of similarities in the flavor. So I'm going to pour it in. Now, the whole point of the double gong dao bei session, the double gong dao bei style, is it's like grandpa style, but for sharing. So you guys know grandpa style is the most common way to drink green teas. If you're drinking it by yourself, definitely grandpa style. But even in a lot of tea shops and green tea areas, if you drink green tea, oftentimes they will give you your own glass and throw some tea in there. This is a lot of the same principles. Usually it's a glass container that's used, and we don't cover it. One of the main aspects, most important aspects of double gong dao bei brewing is that we don't cover it. Covering it traps heat and it kills the tea, as they say. Now, I will say that these days it is common to also go to a tea shop, and they do use gaiwans for green tea brewing. I'm not going to say they never use gaiwans for green tea brewings, but I have realized, and from the conversations that I've had, that gaiwans are kind of for your normal everyday teas. But if you're at a shop and they're using a gaiwan, and then they bring out a special tea, they bring out a more expensive tea, they bring out a new tea they're looking to taste, they will switch to double gong dao bei brewing. And what I'm looking for right now to let me know that this first steep is done is I'm looking for all the leaves to stay floating, to not sink, to stay on top, but I want them to lose their dry appearance. Let's take a look. They're looking pretty moist. They don't look like dry leaves anymore. All of them are getting saturated, all of them getting wet. So now I can start thinking about pouring out the first steep. So we're going to use visuals to give us a general idea of when to pour, but to really fine tune it, we're going to smell. That's nice. Ooh, nutty. So I like this. I also can feel that the water is pretty cooled off, so it's not really going to steep much more. So we're going to pour. Now, when we're pouring, there's a trick to making sure that no leaves go from the gong dao bei from one gong dao bei into the other, and that's to pour steadily. If you pour steadily, the leaves will not move. I am doing a decent job. I will say the particular shape of this gong dao bei is helping me. There is a lip, but It's a practice of a steady hand, which I don't have, too much boxing, too many shots to the head. But always a strainer is okay too. Here we have the first steep, and you notice I've left a little bit of water at the bottom. We always leave some tea submerged until the end. And there's 2 reasons for this. One reason is to keep these teas fresh, to keep them from oxidizing. Now, when you're drinking by yourself and you're drinking quickly, this is not such a big deal. But the double gong dao bei style really is for sharing. It's grandpa style, but for sharing. So if you were drinking with 3 or 4 people and you're chatting and maybe you're drinking other teas and maybe you're reading a book and the steep time between is long, the time between steeps is longer, then you wouldn't want your teas drying out. You wouldn't want them oxidizing. So it can be really helpful if you're drinking very slowly. There's 2 other reasons, but we're going to get to those later. This video is inspired by comments on Discord. I saw some people saying that they haven't really seen me drink green tea before and they don't know how I brew it. So I wanted to make that very clear, though I do make one of these videos every few years. And every time it gets a little bit better, but I wanted to make a new one, make a better one, make a more thorough one, better angles. So that's one reason. The other reason is I saw a tea seller, I'm not going to name names, but one that is fairly popular. And he did some videos about how different categories of tea are made. And he was just wrong. He was just strangely wrong. And when we talk about tea categories, there is gray areas, there is experimentation, there is teas that don't exactly follow the line. But when we talk about tea categories and how they're separated, we're kind of generalizing a bit and once again, this is fundamental. And then as you get into tea, we can talk about nuances. But even at the fundamental, this person was just wrong. So how is green tea made? We know that every tea is separated by making. The difference between a white tea, a yellow tea, a green tea, an oolong, a black tea, and a red tea, and a dark tea, a heisha, is all making. So what's green tea? Green tea is you pick the leaf and you immediately shaching it. There can be a little bit of a withering step, but there doesn't have to be. There often is, there isn't always, there doesn't have to be. But basically it's immediate shaching. It is immediate exposing this leaf to high heat, deactivating the enzymes, preventing it from oxidizing, fermenting, whatever you want to use. And that's it. That's it. And so I was very surprised when this person who was talking about green tea started adding these extra steps. They were talking about rolling and withering and this and that. And I was like, that's not green tea. That's not green tea. This is also why you'll hear some people say that green tea is unoxidized tea. Tea with 0% fermentation, 0% oxidation, that is green tea. While this is technically true, it's kind of putting the cart before the horse. They're putting the cart before the horse. It's not oxidized, it's not fermented because of the making. And I don't like categorizing teas by oxidation levels for 2 main reasons. Reason number 1, that's not how tea makers think about it. If you ask a oolong maker to tell you how is oolong made, what's the difference between oolong and a green tea, they don't talk about fermentation level. They don't say, oh, oolongs are only 50% fermented. They're going to talk about the process. They're going to talk about the shaching and the yaoqing, the shaking, and the resting. Oh, second thing is fermentation levels are always, those are also generalized. So, okay, we can say green tea is 0, but it's not exactly 0. We can say Hong Cha is 100, but it's not exactly 100. And then it gets a little confusing. I don't like when people, but it's all those the oolongs are 50% and the yellow teas are 15%. That's, yeah, maybe some, but not all. Once again, it's just not a good way to think about tea making. Tea making is based off of processing, and then the fermentation is a result of that. So, notice, we left it here. Once again, second important part. Now, so right now, this tea is brewing. If I were to drink this right now, it would be a very strong condensed brew, very flavorful, probably a little over steeped. There's a way of drinking green teas that I've called the Buck method, named after a good friend of mine from back in the tea drunk days, Buck. Buck used to like his double gong dao bei green teas only filled up to there. So half the water, which just gave you much more condensed, flavorful brew. Excuse me, tea burp. So this right here is a very strong brew. So if we were to drink this, it would be not too pleasant. It'd be like an oversteeped Gaiwan tea. But when we add more water, it dilutes. It dilutes. Okay, here we go. Here's steep number 2. Now, notice, teas are still floating. They're fully opened up. They're starting to sink a little bit. That means you hit the right spot for the second brew. They're starting to sink a little bit. They're still mostly floating, but they're at the top. This is going to be your shortest steep time. Take a smell. I did let my water cool a little too much. So I'm going to let this sit a little bit longer. Once again, I'm using smell to judge. So generally, so double gong dao bei brewing is doable, but it is a little bit tricky. And one of the hardest parts, or one of the big mistakes that even I make, is putting too hot of water in. Your first steep, the water's too hot. Your second steep, the water's too hot. So right here, like I mentioned, my water's a little bit too cool today, but that's okay. That just means it's going to steep really slow, and it might be a little bit soft flavor-wise. If the water was too hot, then it would oversteep. It would brew too fast, and then my next steeps would be ruined. So in the beginning, when you're trying double gong dao bei brewing, and just in general, it's always better to go a little bit cooler on the water, because you can always bring the heat up. You can't really bring the heat back down. So let's see how I'm pouring today. Let's see how I'm pouring today. Feeling a little bit bored. It is nice that as the leaves open up, it does get a little bit easier to pour because they kind of catch on each other. And once again, this gong dao bei has a lip, which is really saving my butt right now because I'm not pouring this nicely. But for those of you who like a more meditative, who want to have a meditative session, this is a nice way. Keep a steady hand. All right, second brew is going to be the most flavorful brew. The leaves have fully opened up, but they still have a lot to give. That's nice. That's crisp. You know, this is last year's Dingu Dafang, and I will say that it is not fresh. It's a year old. I'm not going to sit here and act like it's just like it was in the spring, like it was in the summer. It has lost a little bit of its freshness, of its life. It is mellowed out a little bit. That nutty note's a little bit there. But it's still nice. It's still refreshing. It's still clean. This is an early pick. Very nice. One thing, as we get into going back to temperature. So right now I'm going to warm up my water again. Now I use double gong dao bei brewing because it was the way I was taught, and it's the way I prefer. And I've noticed a lot. I've noticed a lot through all the years of double gong dao bei brewing. One of the things I've noticed is talk a little bit for a moment about the nuances and where double gong dao bei brewing can get actually really nuanced, a little bit tricky once you get into it, is the temperature, the environment, the room temperature will actually influence the brewing. And there are times, usually at the extremes, you do have to take this into account. So, we're going to let that cool a little bit. Once again, I'm playing it a little bit safe today, but I think we're already 3 steeps in, so I can go a little bit warm with water. I want the leaves, when I pour water, I want the leaves to spin. I want them to all of them to get wet, but I don't want them to be pushed down. I don't want them to get shoved down. See, this was... Now, on this steep, ideally, the leaves are dropping a little bit more. Ideally, on the third steep, you are starting to see it a little bit, but you really want the leaves opened up, really expressing themselves, opened up, filling up the gong dao bei. My water temperature was a little bit too cool, so we're not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet. So, other things that are playing into this. Room temperature is going to affect it, which is kind of cool. And usually on the extremes. So, for example, if it's a very hot day as compared to a very cold day, this glass, the heat in this glass will either maintain or disperse. Because you think about it right now, yes, I poured hot water in, but it is slowly cooling. And when we talk about that little bit at the bottom, yes, it's brewing, but then eventually it cools to a point where it kind of stops brewing. It's brewing very, very slowly. You don't really notice the difference. That's why it doesn't brew fully. On a hot day, though, that heat is not going to transfer out as fast. And so you have to be a little more careful with the brewing temperature. On a cold day, that heat's going to leave really quick. You know, if it's really chilly in here and the surface is cold, this glass is going to cool down very quickly, so you do want to use warmer water. Speaking of warmer water, I am going to heat up the water again because this really is much too cool. Yeah. Another thing that I've noticed plays a part is how much time. Once again, so right now I am drinking by myself and I am drinking fairly quickly. Partially because I have this big old cup and one full gong dao bei, I think more or less fits in this cup. And I'm drinking fairly quickly. And so once again, this is brewing. We want this to be brewing. But if I'm drinking very quickly and I drink this and I drink that and I pour this, and it's only been a few minutes, it doesn't have as much time to brew. And so if I'm drinking by myself, I will add a little bit. That's another time I might use a little bit hotter water. That was the last steep. So when we talk about double gong dao bei brewing, there really is a lot that kind of play into it. It is very much like cooking, I think, where it's how the leaves are reacting to a sustained heat source. You know, gong fu chai is kind of chopped up. This is continuous, and you have to keep that in mind. You don't have to keep that in mind, actually, but you can keep that in mind, and it does influence. See this. So now you see it starting to drop a little bit more. And we're gonna let that sit for a little bit. The second steep is usually pretty quick. The third steep you can let sit, and we're gonna look for those leaves to open up. We're gonna look for them to start dropping. So here we're starting to see that this is what the third steep should look like, more or less. There's some at top, there's some in the middle, there's some at the bottom. All the leaves have completely opened up, they're starting to sink. This is the third steep. Generally, lower quality teas are going to sink a little bit faster, higher quality teas are going to float a little bit more. You can start to see how temperature is affecting each of these steeps and how each of these steeps flow into each other. And you can see where if I had poured in too hot of water, this second steep would have been, the tea leaves would have just right to the bottom. It would have given everything off too quickly and it would have been oversteeped. Generally, double gong dao bei steeping will give you 4 steeps. Generally, as you saw, we got 5 today. So we said there was 3 reasons for keeping the water at the bottom. Do you remember the first one? First one was keeping the tea leaves fresh. The second one is to keep the steep times quick. So if you notice, my steep times have generally been pretty short, and that is because, once again, this is always brewing. So when we add more water, it just dilutes and does a little bit more steeping, but it generally just dilutes. And so what that means, as compared to if we were to drink everything, we don't have to keep starting from zero. We can we have a jumping off point. We have a jumping off point. This for me is actually a little bit of a test. If I'm watching someone drink green tea in a glass, and whether it be in China or in the West, and I see them finish their cup, finish their glass, and then refill, I'm like, you're not really a green tea drinker. Because it is just understood in the green tea regions. And I have a perfect story for this. When I first moved to Huangshan, I was taking some Chinese classes at the local college, and I had just a tumbler of tea. And, I'd gotten to the bottom, and there was a little bit of water. It's just like this. It was submerged. And I went into a convenience store. And to call this a store was a bit of a stretch. It was like 3 walls. Didn't even have a front wall. It was like a nook with some, shampoo and soaps and whatever, home goods. And I go up to the woman, and I was like, hey, do you have any hot water? And I want to refill my tea. Do you have any hot water? And she goes, yes. And she goes to get it, and then she turns to me and she says, don't dump out that water. She goes, don't dump it out. We add more. Don't empty it. And I was like, I know. And it was just, and this was not a tea woman by any means, but in the green tea regions, we know that you don't dump out the water. So if you ever see someone and they're drinking green tea in a glass and they finish it completely and then refill it, they don't pass the vibe check. Now, there is a third reason we keep all the water. Now, this is the last steep. All these leaves have sunk to the bottom. They are done, they are completely spent. Now, normally, in tea drinking, in Gong Fu Cha drinking, the last steep is not very flavorful. The leaves are spent. There's not much they gave off. Not for us. Because remember, we've kept a small thing of very concentrated tea steeping at the bottom. So now, on this last steep, and I'm getting really lazy with the pouring. That was a terrible pour. We're gonna dump it all out. We're gonna dump it all out. Now we finish, because we're finished. We're not gonna refill it. And this last steep will still have flavor. It's gonna have all the tea that's been steeping that whole time. Give some to the teapot. Also, here's a small little thing you can also notice. The last steep also has the most tea. It's really just a strong finish. And it's good. It's good. Definitely weaker, definitely on its way out, but still flavorful, still enjoyable. So that's it. That is a little bit about green tea, just the absolute basics. And then some about double gong dai bei brewing. We got a little bit niche with that, but I think this is actually a really fun way to pour. I think it's a really, once you get into it, there are some nuances, and I've almost enjoyed it more once I started thinking about, how's the weather? Should I add a little bit more heat? Should I use cooler water? Should I be careful? Or should I just fuck it up, which I sometimes like to do. Yeah, and that's that. So thank you very much. I appreciate all of you. Goodbye.